A massive blast has rocked Beirut.
Reports say the target was the likely successor of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Lebanon says 37 people were killed in the last 24 hours. At least 151 were wounded. In a first in this conflict, the Lebanese army responded to Israeli fire. This was after one of its soldiers was killed in an Israeli strike. G7 leaders have urged restraint.
But the story on the ground is one of escalation. Israel is expanding its ground operation in Lebanon, while its retaliation to Iran's missile barrage remains on the cards.
The White House maintains it will not support a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. President Biden saying he is instead discussing possible Israeli airstrikes on Iranian oil sites. The Israeli ambassador to the UN has said that his country is not seeking a full-blown war with Iran. For more, we speak now with Simon Pratt. He's lecturer of political science at the University of Melbourne. Dr. Pratt, thank you very much once again for joining us on the show. Let's talk about Israel's expansion, first of all, those evacuation warnings in southern Lebanon now going beyond the Litani River. We've also, heard of strikes in Beirut near the airport as well. These are things which have not happened since 2006. What are they telling you, Dr. Pratt, about Israel's intentions in the near term?
I think there's little appetite in Israel for a longer-term reoccupation of southern Lebanon. That was a disastrous couple of decades in Israeli history. It ended in 2000. I don't think it will happen again. It's possible that Israel will establish a more permanent presence in the areas directly adjacent to the border inside of Lebanon. Some in the evacuated Israeli northern communities would like this to happen. I think that Israel believes that they're in a position to really deal a very long-term blow to Hezbollah. Hezbollah is extremely weak right now. They have lost effectively all of their strategic leadership. And maybe Israel feels that by entering Lebanon and engaging in ground operations, they can kind of mop up some of the physical infrastructure and remaining assets. And that this will be a longer-term blow to Hezbollah and also to Iran more broadly in the region.
Dr. Pratt, Israel's military and intelligence agencies seem to have regained some momentum after their worst failure nearly a year ago. And one clearly stated goal that they have now is to change the reality across Israel's borders. But do you get a sense that they realize that this requires more than military power?
That's an interesting question. Well, one way to look at this is that while the IDF and Israel's intelligence services largely ignored the threat posed by Hamas, and that this was a terrible blunder, that the same defense apparatus has prepared for quite a long time, since 2006, to fight this war in Lebanon. They're much better prepared. It doesn't seem to me as though there's a broader diplomatic or regional geopolitical strategy here other than employing military force against certain threats. But on the other hand, military force appears to be working well for them so far, at least operationally. So, and of course, Israel's Arab partners and tentative allies, or stronger allies in the case of Lebanon, these entities and states also fear Iran and would probably be happy, maybe not publicly happy, but happy to see Iran significantly weakened. It'll be interesting to see whether a geopolitical strategy, a diplomatic strategy, materializes, because I don't yet see evidence of a particularly well-formed one.
Dr. Pratt, at the same time, we know that Israel's cabinet is mulling its response to missile attack by Iran, with some officials like the former Israeli prime minister urging for immediate action against Iran's nuclear program, saying, it's the best opportunity in 50 years to transform the Middle East. We are getting reports of a possible strike on Iran's oil facilities as well. What are some of the potential benefits and risks of pursuing these actions?
There are some within Israel's defense apparatus and maybe even the defense apparatuses of other countries that would love to see Israel attack Iranian nuclear sites and try to deal a pretty heavy blow to Iran's nuclear program. it isn't clear to me that a military attack would actually accomplish that in anything beyond the short term, and it would certainly heat things up or escalate things significantly further. These nuclear sites are Iran's most important strategic assets, and I think that an Israeli strike on them would probably take us even farther down the direction to war. In fact, some time ago, when Israel was considering doing this, I think Netanyahu was the voice of caution and restraint rather than bellicosity. Things change, but I don't think Netanyahu changes. So perhaps this is rhetoric and we won't see such a strike. The risks are significant and the benefits are probably few. That said, I think Israel feels the need to retaliate in a fairly significant way to this unprecedented attack on Israeli territory. I think that this was a pretty aggressive gesture by Iran, a gesture of desperation on Iranian part. I might also add, not a gesture of strength. So Israel will have to hit back, I guess, and we'll see how it does so and whether Israelis are capable of restraint and a little bit less desperation.
Speaking of desperate Iran, they also warned any response from Israel would be met with stronger retaliation in kind. We know that Iran has some 3,000 ballistic missiles in its arsenal. Where do you see this potential tit for tat leading to?
Well, now it's probably more like 2,900 after they fired a bunch at Israel. So maybe that matters. Sorry, that's a dark joke. Look, Iran might have said this, but Iran also said, oh, we see the matter as fully concluded. That's not the language of an entity that wants a tit-for-tat escalation for war. That's the language of an entity that wants things to end here, that felt arm-twisted into military action that it recognizes was risky and would like things to settle down now. So Israel can retaliate. And, retaliations are also forms of signaling. Israel can signal to Iran with its retaliation that even though it's hit back, it doesn't actually want things to spiral. Maybe you'll see a little bit of tit-for-tat violence, but each strike will be successively just a little bit less provocative than the next. You can see retaliatory violence that still takes the trajectory of de-escalation after it peters out. That's the hope, anyway.
Understand. Dr. Pratt, meantime, 3 days to the anniversary of Israel's own version of 9/11. Can you tell us how all this might be affecting hostage and ceasefire negotiations in Gaza?
Well, there are no hostage and ceasefire negotiations in Gaza anymore. I think, to the surprise of many, it appears the Israeli government has effectively sacrificed the lives of the remaining hostages in the name of its wars, both in Gaza and now in Lebanon. There might have been the possibility of a conclusion to both the conflict in Gaza and in Lebanon via a hostage and ceasefire deal, but negotiations for this haven't really progressed at all for a couple of months at this point, and I don't think that there's any indication that they'll resume or conclude in a positive direction. I think Israelis are scared enough of the threat posed by Hezbollah that they understand that their government is focusing on it, and Israel's assassinations of Hezbollah officials and their confrontation with Iran have probably pushed aside the hostages in Israel's public consciousness. The hostage families and their supporters have constantly been agitating for a ceasefire and deal for obvious reasons, and they continue to be a significant political force, but not a particularly conclusive one. And so I don't see the negotiations resuming or concluding anytime soon, if that's what you're asking.
All right, Dr. Pratt, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you very much for your time this morning. That was Simon Pratt, lecturer of political science at the University of Melbourne.